Welcome to this demonstration on how to use calculated members and how to set up key performance indicators so that you get visual presentations on the Excel screens showing how your business is doing. This is an example of what we might be trying to achieve, and it is using the Sales Star Demo example. And here we have an earnings per period. So on average, we're earning £1,525 per day of sales and 1,496 in the following year. Then if we drill in week 1 and week 2 and week 3, we can see the average value of our sales. And you can see here the figures vary, but it's quite difficult to see whether patterns are going up or going down. So what we'd like to be able to do is add visual indicators here. So we've set up some KPIs, key performance indicators, and have a look at the status. And we've defined that certain values are poor sales weeks, certain values are acceptable, around 1,500, and if it's gone up into the 1,600s, then these are good sales weeks. So we can see from this the various good and bad weeks. But in the bad weeks, we'd also like to be able to see whether there are any trends in this, whether having had a bad week, are we recovering? And we can do that by putting trend arrows in. Then if we slide this a little bit, we can see that even though there are some weeks which do not look good for trade, you can see that actually we're recovering the position. So perhaps don't shout at the salesperson too much during those times. So the aim is that we add some visual interpretation to these data values to enable business analysts to be able to make more effective judgments around the business. Let's show how that was done. Now, as I said a moment ago, this example is using the Sales Star Demo example exactly as we've used it in previous weeks, except for perhaps the time dimension, which we've generated using the time wizard. Let's open that and show that we've set up two hierarchies. One is a standard calendar with year, half year, quarter, month, and so on. Perhaps we've got rather more entries in here than you'd normally have. That's for the demonstration purposes. But we've also set up a hierarchy that involves years divided into weeks, divided into the individual dates. And we've done this so that when we drill into a year, we see 52 items rather than, let's say, 2 or 4 or whatever. So we've done this so we get a particularly lengthy list. Now, selecting the cube and double clicking that, it brings up a whole set of design elements. And what we're going to do is add a new calculated measure using a very simple method to the 3 that we've already got. That calculated measure will quite simply be a count of the number of days for whatever level of drill we're looking at. So if we're drilled into the data by year, we will see the figure 365. If we're drilled in by month, and we're listing various months, we'll see the number of days within each of those months. Or if we're drilled in by week, we should see 7 for each of the number of days within a week. The reason for being able to do that is we will set up 2 calculated figures. One will be the average value of sales during whatever drilling period we're looking at. So if we're looking at the yearly level, it will be all the sales divided by the number of days in the year. Or if we're looking at a particular month, let's say a February, it will be all the sales in February divided by 28. Or in another month, it will divide by 30 or 31. We'll also do exactly the same calculation, but we'll be able to find out the month previous to this one. So if we ask for February's previous data, it will refer back to January. Or if we ask for, let's say, May, it will look back to the April figures. That will allow us to set up a key performance indicator to be able to see whether this month's sales are better or worse relative to the previous month. So we're going to be creating a simple measure, 2 calculated measures, and 1 key performance indicator. Let's start with the very simple measure of a count of the number of days within whatever time period we're looking at. And we'll do that by right-clicking within the cube panel on New Measure and show all the columns in the facts table, select Date and ask for a count of the number of distinct dates in whatever time period we're looking for, and OK that. And it gives us this calculated measure, date distinct count. We could, for example, straight away build the cube, and selecting the demo, we could browse it and ask for the value of sales and drill in by our calendar. Now, this gives us a total number of sales within the whole year, but how many days was that? Well, in each of the year, there were 365 days. Let's now drill in, and we can see the number of days within the semesters. Let's explore for February, and we should see that in quarter 1, there are fewer days in February. Now, when we look at the sales count, the number of sales we've made in February, or the value of sales, it's less than it is in either January or March. But is that satisfactory? Is it explained by having fewer days in which to do the sales? What we'd really like to see is some interpretation here to show whether it's up to our target, our key performance indicator, and what trend is going on. So, having got this count, let's make use of it in some calculations. Back in Visual Studio, select the cube and then select the Calculation tab. And here we're going to be able to add some new measures. When you're doing this for yourself, it may well be worth reconnecting back to the data source very, very often, because it's quite easy for the panels here to get out of date with whatever you've just been building. So whenever you need to, reconnect and it will refresh these. We're going to be creating a brand new calculated measure. So select New Calculated Measure. And in this particular example, we'd like to calculate the average earnings within any particular period, whatever that is. And the calculation for that is to find the value, drag in the value, ensure that you've got a space and a division, and then the count. So this is going to say, if it was applied to a full year, it would be the value for the full year divided by the number of days within the full year, or within the months, or within the weeks, or whatever. We can leave all of the other values as default. Particularly, we would actually like to be able to see what's happening here. The one that might be useful is to say where to display this on the Excel area, and we'll put it into the fact sales area. Let's immediately run that. Just before I go into Excel, we're being shown the coding behind the form we've just generated. If I stop the build, then we can see a form version of what we've just entered. So let's select the cube, the browser, back into Excel, and this time we can see the average earnings per period, and I'll put this into a numeric format, just a little bit easier to see. Format to a, let's go for currency with no decimal points. Good. So in all our time at the company, we've been earning on average £1,511. That's the average value. And then if we drill into any particular calendar, let's move that there, we can see that in the first year we did better than the second year, let's drill in. We can see the average sales value. What it's doing is the total divided by the number of days within that period. Now let's create a new column which will be the average earnings in the previous period. And the effect of that is when we compare the two of them, we'll be able to work out any sorts of trends here. Make sure the cube is selected, go to the calculations area, ask for a new calculated member and type in its name. I'm going to call it the previous average earnings per period. And it's a calculation. It's a calculation based on the average earnings per period. Now, unfortunately, we have to type this in. We can't just drag it from here. So this formula is going to be around brackets and then the name of the field, measures.average earnings per period. And then a very powerful piece of code, if we drill down into our dimensions, I'm getting a error code here because I need to refresh. There we go. And find one of the names of dimensions, we can bring this up. And then type in previous or prev member and close the bracket. You'll see that goes brown. It's a recognized name. This is a very powerful piece of code. It's going to use the definition that we've just set up about what an average earning per period is, but rather than applying it to the current row on any spreadsheet, it will look at the previous row. So if we happened to be drilled into a year, it will show the previous year. If we happen to be drilled into the weeks level, it shall show us the previous week. And this is allowing us a way of comparing these two. So again, let's just demonstrate that. And in our cube, I'm going to go to refresh and refresh all. Changes this here. And you see we've got the previous value. So in the cube, I'm showing the average earnings per period, and because my extra calculated measure is designed to work on the weeks hierarchy, I've selected weeks. But then if I look for the previous value, we can see here that in 2014, that's our current sales, and there wasn't a previous value for 2013. 2015, the previous year's values, well, it's the same figure copied over, but the value of this is when we drill in. In any one week, we can compare against the previous week, but still, it'd be nice to have a pictorial representation, a coloured representation here, showing the difference and the trends. So again, back into the design, and just going to be cautious and reconnect so it's up to date. Now, currently the debug is still on, so I'm going to stop that, and it allows us to go back into the forms view here. So we now have two calculated measures. I'd like to set up a key performance indicator here and use the tool for creating a new KPI. We can choose a name for it. I'm going to call mine earnings KPI. We need to give it some value, which is the target of the key performance indicator, and we're going to say we want to analyze the average earnings per period, which is the variable created earlier on. In this particular example, we don't need to set a goal, but we do want to set both a status to say whether it's good or bad, and the trend, what direction is it going in. That's for us. When this value is above a certain value, we're going to say then that is good. When the same measure is greater than 1500, then that's an acceptable level of performance. Else, we are unhappy. It's a poor level of performance. and we will end that statement. So we've defined here what is good, acceptable, and poor, or it's green, yellow, and red. We also want to be able to work out what the trend is, and that's going to be a comparison between the current value and the previous value. So let's type that in. It's a case when this average earnings divided by, let's move that over there a little bit so we can see it, divided by the previous happens to be, now if it's above 1.05, then it's a good trend. If those two figures are equal, so we haven't made any progress at all, the division of that would be 1. So this is said it's 5% above the previous levels. Oops, I've forgotten here. Then that is good. Return the value 1 when all of that, let's copy that, if our sales are better than 2% down, then that's within the level of tolerance. But we could say else. If we've dropped 2% in our sales since last month or last period, then that's no good, and end. Super. So we've defined both the what we're happy with in terms of green, yellow, red, and then the directions. We're saying that if something's more or less the same as last month, leave it. If it's 5% better, then that's good, otherwise bad. Oops, I have a spelling mistake there. It's a double P at the end. Good, so let's rebuild the cube. And you do get a sort of visual indication things are okay. If you see the status and the trend symbols, you're on the right lines. Into Excel, and I will refresh, and in fact I can already see that the data is showing there. You will see that it's showing many null values here. We can easily address that by moving the hierarchy into the report filter, selecting it, selecting multiple items. Now we don't want to see all possible years, we just want to see the years that we have data for, which in our case is 2014, 2015, and OK that. And then moving the value back into the row labels. So if we just move that over a little bit, the other thing I'm going to do is just center up these columns. It's just so it's a little bit easier for you to see this. So if I click the center there. Now, as we drill in to the weeks, we can now see that even though we've got a number of or under target levels, we can see that some weeks we're going up from a poor base, some weeks we're holding more or less steady, some weeks we're actually making a 5% increase, and this gives a much better feel for the direction of travel of the business. You can see here we seem to be a little bit up and down during those periods, whereas here we're all rather steady in the values. Thank you for watching this video.